What's going on, guys? Sharpshot here. Hope you guys are having a great day so far. So for today's video, we're going to be ranking the top 5 best survivor maps in DBD. The maps that are going to be ranked in this video are going to be maps that are a lot more survivor sided and play more towards the survivor side, whether that be where the gens are on the map, how big the map is, or how good the loops on that map are. These maps generally tend to lean more towards the survivor side and give them a better chance at escaping, and it makes the killer have a harder time to kill off the survivors on this map. This video will be good for survivors who are ever wondering which map offerings to bring to give them the best chance at escaping and have a really good trial against the killer, whether that be on solo queue or squad with friends. So I'm going to be going from number 5 to number 1, with number 5 being the least survivor sided map of the group and number 1 being the most survivor sided map in DBD. And for each of these maps, I'm going to be giving reasons why I think these maps are actually survivor sided. You can really make an argument for every map being number 2 to number 5, so this order could change up a lot based on your opinions. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right into the video. This might surprise some people, but coming in at number 5, we have the Eyrie of Crows map. This is the 8th biggest map in DBD, coming in at 9,984 square meters. But don't get me wrong, when playing on this map, it seems way bigger than it actually is because of the fact that the gen spread is so wide. You'll have gens in the corner of the map, and you'll have loops in the corner of the maps as well. There's so much going on in the outskirts of this map that it just makes it feel a lot bigger. This map is really open and it's really bright because it's in the daylight, so it allows for really easy vision, and this could be for good or for worse. This basically means that if you're working on a gen on the outside, you're basically always going to see the killer coming from really far away because you have such good vision. But that could also be a bad thing, which means that you can't really hide from the killer because you guys are always in plain sight. But overall, I think it's a lot better to see the killer coming at you than being able to hide. The tiles and the loops on this map overall are pretty safe, except for some loops on the outskirts, like in the corner of the map near the rocks. Those can get pretty unsafe at times. But overall, the closer you get to the main building and the closer you get to the center of the map, that's when the loops get better and better. Speaking of the center of the map, the best part about this map and what makes it really survivor sided is the main building. This 2-story main building has an actual infinite loop in it, which means that a survivor could hypothetically loop the killer forever, with the killer never being able to catch up to the survivor. The second floor doesn't have anything on it except for 3 pallets. It doesn't have any gens or anything useful for objective wise, but if the survivor brings the killer up there, it's basically just going to be a really long loop up there. The killer is going to waste so much time trying to catch a survivor that the killer shouldn't even bother going to loop main building. There's 3 or 4 breakable walls that spawn in the main building for the killer to break, and if they don't break those, it makes it utterly impossible to loop around it. And what makes it even worse for the killer is that right outside of the main building, there are really good tiles and really good safe loops for the survivors to actually go to once they go outside of the main building. So not only is it really tough to loop inside the main building, but survivors could chain loops going from inside the main building out to the other tiles, or the other way around. They can loop from the outside to the inside. So overall, looping in the center of the map can be really tough if these survivors know what they're doing. And not to mention, the killer shack in the corner of the map is really good to loop at as well. There's always a gen near there, and it's basically a gimme gen to the killer because it's really tough to loop around there, because outside of that gen, it's really isolated and there isn't anything going on there. Overall, the main building is what really makes this map survivor sided, and if you're ever playing on this as a survivor, make sure to try and go to main building to loop. Coming in at number 4, we have Mount Ormond. Ormond is actually the same size as our previous map, being the 8th biggest map in the game, but as I said previously, there's so much going on in the outskirts and on the edges of the map that it makes it feel a lot bigger. Outside of the middle generator in the main building, most of the gens always spawn on the outskirts and on the edges of the map, kind of like in a big square around the main building, and all of the main tiles and the main loops are on the outskirts and the edges of the map as well, so it makes the map feel a lot bigger than it actually is. Speaking of loops on this map, there are so many options. There's the main building, there's the vehicle, whether that be the garbage truck or the crane, and there's also the killer shack that you can loop at, on top of the really long rock rows that spawn right outside of the main building that cut the line of sight, and on top of all the tile loops I mentioned before on the outer edges of the map. Other than a few places around the map, you're gonna have a hard time finding a dead zone on Ormond. There's always always some good safe loops that you could chain in your chase and just keep looping to, which is what especially makes the main building really strong, is because the main building itself inside is kind of tough to loop at, but if you take advantage of the windows leading out of the main building, it's actually really strong because the main building leads out some pretty decent loops right outside of the main building. This map is really open and it's really bright, so if you're working on an outside gen, you're gonna see the killer coming from pretty far away, which can be for better or for worse with the line of sight not being able to hide very well. But this map has a lot more things that you can hide behind, like rocks, than it did with Eerie of Crows, so you're gonna have really good vision while still somewhat being able to hide from the killer, which is really good. And with the way the gens are spread out, if you finish the center gen in the main building, it's gonna be pretty tough to actually get yourself in a 3 gen. So overall, the gen spread is really beneficial to the survivors. It's a bright and open map that's really good for seeing the killer ahead of time, and the main building is actually pretty good, and there's so many safe loops everywhere that this makes Mount Ormond a really survivor-sided map. Coming in at number 3, we have Gas Heaven. Gas Heaven is actually the 5th biggest map of the game, coming in at 10,496 square meters. And the fact that most of the gens and the loops are on the outskirts of the map, it makes this map seem way bigger than it actually is. As I just said, most of the gens spawn behind the wall of cars, which are on the outskirts and sort of near the edges of the map, so it makes it really tough for the killer to patrol gens because they're all really far apart from each other. And speaking of the walls of cars, this is one of the bigger factors on why this map is so survivor sided. The huge wall of cars literally cut the map into little chunks that if the killer isn't in or behind one of the wall of cars in those little chunks of the map, they're virtually defenseless, and you're going to be able to get free gen progression because the killer won't be able to actually see you behind the wall of cars. They split the map and really cut the line of sight for the killer, and it makes it really tough to gauge what's going on in the trial for the killer. And they're also pretty decent to loop around to get to other parts of the map, so the wall of cars are a big bonus to this map. Outside of the wall of cars, there's a ton of really good loops. There's a garbage truck that spawns right next to the killer shack, so that's a really good loop right there. There's the main building that's extremely good with the windows if you get good use out of them, that also lead to some pretty decent pallets in the middle of the map. And outside of those, all the tiles and the loops on the outskirts of the map behind the wall of cars are actually pretty decent as well, so wherever you are in the map, you're gonna have a pretty hard time not finding a good place to loop outside of a few dead zones on the really edges of the map. And with the gen spread, if you get the gen done in the very center of the map, not the one in the main building, but the one that's kind of near the car loops and stuff, you should basically be all set with a 3 gen. So overall, the amount of buildings and loopable tiles that you have on this map, on top of the wall of cars cutting the line of sight and cutting the map into little chunks for the killer to have to go into to actually patrol gens, this makes Gas Heaven a really survivor-sided map. Coming in at number 2, we have Mother's Dwelling. Mother's Dwelling is actually the biggest map in DBD by over 1,000 square meters, coming in at 12,032 square meters. And this map does feel even bigger than it actually is because all of the gens and a ton of loop spots and a ton of tiles are on the outskirts of the map. The gen spreads are so far apart. It's to the point that if the killer has to travel from one corner gen to the another corner gen on the opposite side of the map, basically the gen's gonna be like halfway done by the time they get there because this map is just so big. So the sheer size of this map is what makes it really survivor sided, because the killer's gonna have to travel such long distances to patrol every gen and to also loop the survivors. There's the main building that's actually pretty decent to loop in if you know what you're doing and you might have balanced landing. You could drop down from the 2nd floor and get some really good distance. There's also the killer shack, and there's also another smaller 2-story shack. So around these structures, there's a lot of really good tiles as well to chain in your loops, so you're not going to run out of too many places to loop on this map. And honestly, if you just hold the W key and you just keep running and you make the killer chase you across the map, this will allow the other survivors to do the gens. It'll make the killer struggle even harder to patrol the gens because they're so far apart. Finally, you guys could have guessed it, but coming in at number 1, we have Haddonfield, or what I like to call it, Haddon Fun. Lambkin Lane is actually the 4th biggest map in the game, coming in at 10,752 square meters. Its sheer size can definitely be felt in a trial because the fences and the loops literally go to the very edge walls of the map. Everywhere on this map is a good loop, and there are gens at the corners of the map as well, so literally everywhere you are in Haddonfield there is a place to loop, which makes it really good for the survivors. And speaking on loops being everywhere, on top of the fences that you can loop around that are really easy loops, and on top of the pallets that are on the outside and near the cars and the little garage loops, we can't not mention the houses. The houses are so good to loop in, and the windows you can vault in and out of in those houses can be really strong if you get good use out of them. You could chain your loops from the outside to the inside of houses or vice versa. But what makes this map the most survivor sided map in the game is actually where the gens are, and the fact that most of the gens are inside of the houses. The gens that are on the second stories of these buildings or on the roofs on the second story of the building make it so hard for the killer to access. They have to spend so much more time actually going to a gen if they see a survivor on it. Just to give you an example, on a regular map, if the killer sees someone on a gen, they just walk up to the gen, M1 them. But on Haddonfield, if the killer sees a survivor working on a second story gen, they have to walk all the way up the stairs, and by then the survivor will be able to easily escape and start a chase without even getting hit. So they're gonna waste so much time getting to gens that are being worked on and trying to actually chase survivors that it makes it really tough for the killer to make any progress whatsoever. And even the houses without the gens, they're really tough to access, because if you're chasing a survivor and they go all the way up to the second story, and especially if they have balanced landing, you're gonna struggle so much catching the survivors dropping down from the second story. So I wanted to do a little honorable mention for Fractured Cowshed. This is probably the best Coldwind map and is the 8th largest map in the game, but the fact that there is loops and there are things going on literally everywhere on this map make it feel way bigger. There are gens at the corner of the maps, there are really good loops at the edges of the map. The corner and the center of the map make it really tough for the killer to chase in and see the gens that are actually in the center of the map and see if they're getting worked on, and it's also tough for them to see beyond the corn and see if there's gens getting worked on in the distance. So the corn really makes the map seem really protected for the survivors because there isn't much line of sight. With mentioning the outer edges of the map, there's always a safe loop to go to, and especially the little long cart loops that are next to the hay bales. Those are really good, and there's around 4 or 5 that spawn around the map, so these loops are really easy to loop around and make it really tough for the killer to actually get you because they're so long. And these safe tile loops around the map, like the long cart ones, are really easy to chain into the buildings and the structures around the map, with the killer shack, the multiple farm vehicles, and also the main barn. That's actually really good to loop in with the windows. And the gen spread on this map is actually really favorable for the survivors. There's a couple of gens inside of the corn near the center of the map, but the corn actually provides really good cover for those gens. Outside of that, most of the gens are on the outskirts of the map, and what's really good about these gens is that there's always a really safe loop that you can go to if the killer comes and chases you at these gens. So yeah guys, those were the top 5 survivor maps in DBD. Let me know in the comments what you guys thought about this ranking, and also let me know if you guys would want to see this for the killer side and the top 5 best killer maps in DBD. I'd be really interested to make a video on that as well. So yeah guys, that's been the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you're new. This has been Sharpshot, and I will see you guys in the next video.